And in the end, officers fired 17 times. They struck Zambrano Montes up to 7 times.
Courtney, of course, these protests that we've been talking about have gone on all over the country in large cities and smaller areas, including the Tri-Cities. So Richland, Pasco, Kennewick, they have seen these sorts of demonstrations as well. It's not just Seattle, Portland, and Spokane. So what are some of the things and you've seen, some of the people you've talked to, some of the signs you've read at the demonstrations you've attended in the Tri-Cities region?
Sure. So the Tri Cities has seen multiple protests with hundreds and hundreds of people voicing their demands for justice for George Floyd and calling for major changes to policing. And overall, the protests have been very, very peaceful. There was one incident in Richland last week where a white man yelled at protesters and then pulled out a gun. He was arrested and no one was hurt. At the time, he was a member of this group that sprung up called Defend the Tri. It was formed on Facebook, and now armed men and women have started patrolling some business parking lots. Group leaders have said they support the protests that are happening, but people I've talked to have said it's been a very scary situation. The groups patrolling with guns have made people feel threatened with the hallmarks of white supremacy. At the protests, people have lined city blocks, often shoulder to shoulder. They've chanted and laid on the sidewalk for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That's the same amount of time that a white police officer pressed his knee in George Floyd's neck. There have been signs reading, "I can't breathe," "Black Lives Matter," "Latinx for BLM," and people in Pasco also held up the names of the last 100 people killed by police. And one thing to note is that Pasco has also had its own high-profile police shooting.
Right. And that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about. Let's remember in 2015, the killing of a man named Antonio Zambrano Montes by Pasco police sparked big protests over several days and weeks at the time. And so I just wonder, can you remind us of some of the case that happened at the time, some of the fallout of it, and what happened to the officers involved there 5 years ago?
Sure. So 5 years ago, Antonio Zambrano Montes was killed in a busy intersection on the edges of downtown Pasco. He'd been throwing rocks at passing cars, and police were called. Officers said they were concerned that he could seriously injure someone with the large pieces of rock. And in the end, officers fired 17 times. They struck Zambrano Montes up to 7 times. The Franklin County prosecutor decided not to criminally charge the 3 officers involved, although many in town had called for them to be charged with murder. Additionally, state and federal prosecutors declined to file charges against the 3 officers. Then, in kind of an unusual move, and after a lot of pushback, the Franklin County coroner held a fact-finding inquest in the case. The inquest jury also found that the 3 officers were justified when they shot Zambrano Montes. The family was awarded a $750,000 settlement in a federal lawsuit against the city of Pasco, its police department and chief, and the officers involved. Then a federal review called for some big changes to the Pasco Police Department. A year after that, the Department of Justice found that the Pasco Police had improved. Some of those improvements included changes to its use of force policy and strengthening its community relationships within the community. And now some protesters have said those changes have made a difference.
I remember at the time covering that 5 years ago that a lot of the issues that were brought up was the fact that Pasco has a very large Hispanic population, close to 50%, if not over. But the police force was overwhelmingly non-Latino. So there was some kind of an imbalance there, the police force versus the community that they are called to serve and protect. And I wonder if that element is sort of popping up at all in the current demonstrations that you're seeing.
Yeah, I think Zambrano Montes shooting has really primed the Tri-Cities to call for change and to be ready and prepared for change. So several groups have been working hard with the Pasco police since Antonio Zambrano Montes was killed. They say it's been hard at times, but policing reforms in Pasco have helped. Some people that I talked to said they're no longer afraid when Pasco police pull them over, and that hadn't been the case up until these changes were implemented. In fact, I was talking with one of the organizers at the Pasco protest when Pasco police cars drove past. They had their lights flashing and they honked and kind of waved in support. And she said it was really awesome to see that. But that doesn't mean that things are where they need to be. Protesters said that this is still just the beginning and they'll be coming back and pushing for more and more and more changes, even after people move on and head back to work and school, like they did with Antonio Zambrano Montes protests. And they say this fight for justice will just continue.
Well, it's all good information. We thank you for going out there and reporting it for us, Courtney, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Scott.
You can see more on these and other stories at our website, nwpb.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.